Thick, gravelly, gloopy glops of black sludge swirl and spurt from your mouth, like the back end of an asphalt truck that has sprung a leak. And no matter how hard you try to move your hands to cover your mouth, you can't. You're frozen in place, forced to watch the life drain from your face and your mouth as it spews unholy fluids. The eyeballs, they sink back and flip to expose the inner mechanisms of the eye socket. Blood pours down into the flowing black primordial ooze, mixing with the black chunks to become a crimson soup of goop. Goop that caused you to choke and to spit and to yak more up. And the chunks cause your trachea to tear and rip. But then you wake up. Then you're safe, in your bed, where no monsters can get you now. Or at least that is the story we're told. In reality, however, the monsters that you must worry about, they're not the ones hiding under your bed or in your closet. No, unfortunately, the monsters that do exist, they walk among us, waiting and lurking, stalking, hoping for the perfect moment to strike. And now, this may sound cliche, but in all honesty, it is. However, it must be said. Those who look not at the things exposed by light, those who ignore that which lurk in the waiting for you to slip so they can sink their teeth into the sack of meat that you are, those who look but do not observe, they are far worse than those who just can't see. In fact, I would say that blind men see far more than these cretins. A man who runs with ankle weights, never knowing that anyone else does, he's held down by far more than just his ankles. A young boy named Jameson Wild, 12 years old, wakes up in a pool of cold sweat. His polyester sheets suction cupped to the side of his leg, making it feel as though he jumped into a pool with a wool suit on. He was unnaturally hot, and the rise in his body's temperature made him worry that he had a fever. This was the way that his childish lisp formed the word which his mother adored. But unfortunately for young Jameson, there was no fever. The sensation that he felt was something else, something far worse and far more sickening. As Jameson worried away in his bed, dreading the next few days of doing absolutely nothing and feeling like he was hit by a dump truck, a burp formed within him. He felt it coming. He internalized it, not because of any other reason than what his father told him one night, after he came home from the post-work celebratory beer chugging competition at Rizzo's, the local bar. Jameson held his mouth, fearing that if he burped, he would throw up like his father told him. He had held a 10-year streak of not throwing up, and he was not planning on letting that end tonight. But he could feel the burp growing, the gases combining and formulating, turning it into what felt like Jameson had swallowed a watermelon whole and was having more than trouble getting it down. Only Jameson was having trouble keeping his down. His eyes watered, his mouth watered, and the heavy lump in his throat was climbing closer and closer to his mouth. At that moment, Jameson came to terms with the situation. He closed his eyes and allowed the now massive burp, like a Goku spirit bomb that built up to the point of immeasurable size, was released. Jackson giggled. He still felt worse than Bill Buckner after the '86 World Series. Yet the burp caused no yak to come up. None at all, in fact. However, with each second that passed, a taste spread through his mouth. A familiar taste. Rotten eggs. Jameson grimaced and burrowed his head into his MyPillow. No amount of patent pending anything would get this awful taste out of his mouth. Now with aches and pains fit for the COVID pandemic and enough raw egg taste to force yourself to break the streak, Jameson finally begins to feel relief. In fact, when you're sick, you sometimes get random spurts of normalcy, where all of a sudden you feel relatively okay, but similar to someone who has worn a watch for years and then took it off, you know. Sickness is similar, only as you can probably tell, our poor Jameson is not suffering from mere sickness. That term is almost insulting. That term's almost insulting to what's really happening. But one thing at a time. Jackson felt the aches melting and his temperature regulating, but the raw egg taste persisted. That never went away, in fact, it grew. But given his slight recovery and the exhaustion that comes with even minutes of the flu, he passed out shortly thereafter. That was until he was awoken by something odd. And odd is selling it short. This was fucking weird. It was the sound of a burp. Now, to the outside viewer, this sounds not funny. It sounds hilarious. But I want you to imagine that you're laying in bed in the middle of the night and you wake up to someone burping. Jameson jumped in his bed as the sound of this enormous burp shook his resting body awake. Confusion more than anything, but still on the verge of laughter, he assumed that he imagined the noise. But then Jameson feels something churning within him. Shit. Jameson sprinted to the bathroom to send his innards halfway to hell and back, shooting a fire hydrant stream of cinnamon-colored water straight down into the toilet. So much so that it splashed his ass cheeks. The taste in his mouth fleeted. His aches and fever were nowhere to be found. All that was left for now was to rid himself of whichever school monstrosity lunch that was tormenting his inside. And outsides, for that matter. Jameson cleansed himself, in more than one sense, on that toilet and sleepily rose from the john to mosey back to his bed. Jameson opened the door to his bedroom and walked directly into a wall of invisible nature that was not physical, but one of odor. A dense layer of that rotten egg smell filled every inch of the room, but extended not into the hallway. It remained solely within his room. After a few moments of quizzical facial expressions and near retching, Jameson snatched his blankets from the bed to bring his slumber to the living room. The rapid snatching of his blanket caused something underneath it to fall from the ground with a gelatinous squelch. The smell intensified. It filled his nose not with odor, but with physical presence. Like an amoeba that latches onto the brain of its host and at some point down the line becomes one with its host, it traveled through Jameson's nasal passage, into his throat, down into his stomach and legs, and then back into his spinal cord and into his brain. When it hit the brainstem, Jameson witnessed a dark flash of the absence of light, which disoriented him. The opposite of a flashlight being shown in your eyes. He fell to the ground almost in slow motion, at least. The way he was perceiving it was in slow motion, and when his body hit the ground, an explosion of energy rushed through his body. The darkness cleared and the light shone upon him. A warmness enveloped him in a blanket of warmth, and he felt stronger than he had ever felt in his very short life. He felt like he could jump 30 feet in the air and not break a limb on the way down. Jameson analyzed the room and noticed something different about his vision. Not only was his vision clearer than ever, it was enhanced beyond that. He could see the slight vibrations in each minuscule part of everything within his room. He could see the energy emitting from each molecule that made up everything. He noticed something that was far stranger than the things he had already noticed. The window in his room had a radiance bursting from it. His eyes adjusted on their own, making him able to bear the bright sheen coming from what seemed to be outside, but with little thought, Jameson seemed to know exactly what it was. You see, the sun would be rising in a few hours, and with each millisecond that passed, his eyes recognized a slight increase in the shine emitting. Jameson wondered to himself if he was having a fever dream, or if he was really watching reality through his own eyes. It felt more like he was watching through the eyes of a hawk, given his newfound ability to home in on damn near each individual atom. But even hawks cannot see that well. At that moment, he hears a knock at the door. He turned to see who it was, but the figure standing at the threshold was unfamiliar and foreign. Even alien at first. All he could see was the slight dark outline of a body, humanoid, but with the same exploding radiance originating from the gut area of the figure, blurring the rest of the body, causing no features to show, and the only things able to be made out were flowing soups of different colors and energies intermingling within the frame of the body. A bright and warm red aura extended out towards him, and he could feel it wrap his body with warmth. Upon feeling this aura, he knew exactly who it was that was standing in his doorway. The colors and auras faded slowly, as if you stood up too fast, but also as if you stood up too fast to immediately have a flashlight placed in your eye. But fade they did, and it revealed the look of horror on his mother's face. She began crying and reached for her chest, revealing the gold cross depicting Jesus' crucifixion that she held dear to her heart, hence it still being worn throughout her sleep. She backed away slowly with a contorted face that was now coming into view, crying and whispering under her breath, and under normal circumstances, he would not have been able to hear the whispers, for they were too quiet, but they traveled into his ears as if she were them. Dear God, dear God, dear God, dear God, dear God, please help me. Dear God, please help me. Why was his mother repeating this phrase that he had heard so often throughout his childhood just by looking at him? Was he really that sick? But this phrase, it typically was supposed to reassure me, he thought. She would say it after a school shooting, after a plane crash, after 9/11, after his grades were bad. But never upon seeing him. Jackson called out to his mother in hopes of knocking her from whatever state it was that she was in. Maybe it was sleepwalking. She interrupts him before he can even speak, and shouts that, "I am not your mother. You are not my son. Please, God, help me." And the house shook as if a high-magnitude earthquake hit down the block. And then, his mother was gone.